Tuesday, January 12th, 1927. Not often in the years since I first left America have you been more on my mind and heart than you have been today. Before I was fully awake, I heard in the deeps of consciousness, "This would be the 12th of January, George." And all day long on this anniversary of our wedding day, I walked and sat with the memory of you. The morning was soft, gray, and sweet-scented. After breakfast, I went out with you and looked at the daffodils and crocuses, coming. New crocuses pushed their way to the light every day, such darling little green whisks. Some of the daffodil points plainly had been walked on. Oh, David Scott and your wild dog, Corey. I set up bamboo sticks with cards dangling from green ribbon warning, "Daffodils!" Then with Flora, I went to feed our swan Peter. But he had vanished from Garden Pond. We went down through the copse to Lake Garden, and behold, there was Peter with the neighbor's young swan, the two apparently quite happy, Peter sailing to us confident and friendly. I was glad that on our day, the two swans found each other. After tea, David and his playmate HP rushed about and played with Corey the dog, while I transferred the manuscripts of my various books from the mouse-frequented box in the scullery to a sound wooden case in our good-sized pantry, or larder as they call it now, between the dining room and kitchen. When I had put these papers away and the child visitor had gone home, I came up to the dear blue and white room of mine and bolted the door. Then I took your small picture from the shelf by my bed and set it on the mantelpiece between the branched candlesticks. I lit a joss and put it where the sweet smoke should rise and float across your face. Then I unlocked the church chest, took out your traveling bag, and sat with it by the fire, turning over relics not touched for how many years? I decided I must let go some relics for fear of alien hands. I put the things selected into a cardboard box. The few left in the old traveling bag will be easily burned one day, since what's left is mainly paper and little of that. Yet I sealed what's left in a packet so that even I may never touch those scraps of paper carelessly, if I ever touch them again. They made me ache. But I began some time ago to see what a wrong, what cruelty to you would be my continuing to think of you as shrinking, let alone with the old intolerable pain. So, for your sake as well as mine, I must meet you with something better than tears. For if I am to make a memorial for you, a Dankmal bulb out of my days instead of marble, I must set about it as a mother of a posthumous child sets herself to shield the unborn from the long shadow of her grief. I have been reading some of the letters. Many are burned, my dear. All the more intimate are ashes. Though no letter of yours was ever intimate in any shy-making sense, there was about you always a beautiful modesty that saves my closest thought of you from any shame or shrinking. Was ever anyone so warm and strong in feeling, so normal and so unsmirched as you? I cannot think so. Men who have great physical attractions are too often spotted and spoiled. I don't even know how it came that you escaped that soiling from the world. When I think of those sieges laid to you, those I knew about not counting the many more, I wonder at you more today than I ever did. That impression the mere look of you gave, strength and gentleness behind the beauty, how it wrought on women, I think you often did not notice, never knew. In your letter to me on September 28, 1886, you told me to speak of those happy days last summer, the happiest hours of your life. Then in your letter to me on October 3, 1886, you told me you'd seen the proofs of the press photos for your role in the play Held by the Enemy. You said, "They are very good." You promised to send me some as soon as they should be finished. You did. I look at one of those same photographs every night before I go to sleep. It was one of those photos I moved to the chimney piece that the incense of the burning joss might go past your face. Welcome to the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Kaler. In Season 2 of this podcast, we are covering people and events that deeply shaped the woman Elizabeth became. This episode tells the story of Elizabeth's husband, George. It probably seems odd that he hasn't been mentioned till now, so let me explain. George and Elizabeth's time together on this earth was very short. They met when she was 21 and he was 28. He died less than 4 years later. Much more to the point, few of the documents about their relationship survive, making accurate research a challenge. Entire weeks have been ripped out of Elizabeth's diaries, and what she wrote in the decades following his death is often heavily revised. Elizabeth explained this revisionism in an undated note found in her writings on George. She said, "As we grow older, as we come nearer to being ourselves among the dead, as we thus draw nearer to them in time, so we draw nearer to them in spirit and in understanding. That it should be so seems part of the economy and, in its effect, the kindness of the life plan. This heightened sense of kinship with the dead is the date stamp on the coin. On the other side, more and ever more worn, less and less decipherable, the time marks of forgetting show their beneficent part in softening for us the fierce pain tearing asunder the ties of life. What have the young to do with the dead? They are either indifferent or frightened. They turn away. The time is not yet for them to feel the blessedness of the final peace. They feel as yet no companionship with the millions who are dust." Over the course of her long life, Elizabeth edited what she wrote about George as she felt her understanding of him evolved. She seemed determined to record him accurately and not publish anything till she got it completely correct. In 1949, she wrote a note in the margins of something she'd written about George. 61 years after writing these words, a glance through brings me to write the exact opposite of these lines, and so away with the penciling. She would die 3 years later without ever publishing her story of George. Her notes about him were all left together in a green steel trunk under the care of Countess Mildred Buxton, and are now preserved at New York University's Fales Library. Do you see my challenge? If George's own wife didn't feel she could accurately depict him, how am I to do so 138 years after his death, when I have so much less information than she had? And yet, I have one asset Elizabeth did not. I can look at George without the complexities that come with having been in love with him. I can be much more objective in my presentation of the facts about him and them and their circumstances. So here goes. George Richmond Parks was not the only man Elizabeth ever loved, but he is the only one she ever married. A native of Boston, George's father, John, owned the 250-room Maverick House in East Boston. The beautifully ornate hotel served as a community hub and a popular destination for train travelers. George had a financially secure and interesting childhood as he interacted with the dignitaries and personalities who came through the hotel. Boston newspapers tell of elaborate banquets and balls at the Maverick House that kept Boston's high society entertained late into the night. I'll include a photo and some articles about the Maverick House on our website. When John passed away in 1879, family situation immediately changed. John had either experienced a financial loss in his last few years of life, or he'd racked up debts that had to be paid at his death. But this much is clear: their comfortable existence was gone, and the 24-year-old George became primarily responsible for taking care of his mother and 4 younger siblings. He worked a variety of jobs and began acting with a theater group as a way to decompress and socialize. A handsome and charismatic man, he was soon offered a paid acting role and found he could earn decent money in the theater. Before long, he was earning more as an actor than he had been in his other jobs. George met Elizabeth in September of 1883 when they were both members of the Boston Museum Company, a theater group that performed both classical and modern plays. Besides their love of the stage, they shared some significant life experiences. Both were the oldest child of their father's second marriages, and both had suffered the loss of infant siblings. They both preferred the country to the city, but understood their career choice required urban living. Both were intelligent, popular among their fellow actors, and driven to succeed. The same month Elizabeth and George met, she wrote a letter to her father that revealed some insight into her mental state. Does it ever seem odd to you that your daughter should be living the most important years of her youth away from all her kindred and family associations, eating at a table surrounded every day with faces you never saw, and talking with people you will never know, taking important steps about which I cannot consult you, and living you don't even know where? Oh, Papa, write to me, lecture me, scold me, and always love me, for I sometimes feel I don't belong to anybody. Still, I am very happy, and not for all creation would I look back. Elizabeth loved her career, yet longed for the comforting ties of family. Enter the 6-foot-tall, 200-pound George Parks, praised for his light hair and fine eyes. He was a great conversationalist and extremely gallant towards her. But Elizabeth early on told her diary she was unsettled by his pursuit of her. She made sure George understood she was firmly committed to remaining single. She wrote to her grandma, "I do not intend ever to marry. I have always said so, and unlike most girls, have meant it." George either didn't believe Elizabeth, or he was determined to change her mind, because within weeks of meeting her, he asked permission to court her. After their first date, he expressed his desire to make her his wife. On December 4th, Elizabeth's diary records a, quote, "scene with George," unquote. This entry perfectly embodies the difficulty in telling this story. She recorded just enough to indicate turmoil, but nothing which tells us what the subject of the turmoil was. Thankfully, her letters to her grandmother were more revealing. From those letters, we know that for months, Elizabeth waffled between her commitment to not marry and her growing affection for George. Both her grandma and father warned her against the relationship and encouraged her to break it off. Her grandma said his ideas about women and marriage were, quote, "prejudicial and narrow, unconventional, obsolete opinions," unquote. But each time Elizabeth tried to end their courting, she found George to be excellent at debating her out of it. Every single time she broached the subject, he disarmed her arguments against the match. Giving up on telling him in person, she decided to break up with him in a letter. She also asked her father to send her 13-year-old brother Saxton to live with her as a companion and sort of chaperone to provide her an extra layer of fortitude. Elizabeth labored hard over her wording of the breakup letter and mailed it off. As soon as he received it, George returned Elizabeth's letter to her, told her he did not accept it, and continued to shower her with affection and gifts. As she waffled back and forth throughout 1884, in desperation, George wrote her that he would end his life before he'd live without her. Saxton had not been sent to live with his sister, and by January 1885, George was the one escorting Elizabeth to and from everywhere. He accompanied her to and from work, to and from errands, and also on walks. Her diary records lots of walking and talking. George also gave her gifts such as her 1885 diary. He ordered her special surprises. On January 3rd, she told her diary, "Fine, delicious little supper awaiting me, quail on toast and celery." George's thoughtfulness, of course, bless him. In addition to recording George's attentions to her, Elizabeth kept telling her diary how tired she was, but doesn't explain if it's physical or mental exhaustion. She confided to her friend and fellow actress, Nina Busico, of her conundrum. She trusted George's devotion to her and hers for him, but still believes she'd be better off remaining single. Elizabeth's diary mentions each time she spoke to Nina about it, but does not disclose if Nina advised her. On January 4th, 1885, her diary contains the following cryptic entry. She said she was packing up to leave Boston and head to New York. George comes at 2, go to walk at 3. I began a half-hesitating plea for freedom in New York. He seems so troubled and looks so blue. I haven't the heart to hold my point, and the result is only to hasten the denouement. In spite of prudence in the face of every earthly consideration of wisdom and welfare, this tide is surging ever nearer and nearer. I wonder if... No. Time for that is past. I can only shut my eyes and trust to him. Tired of body and soul. The next morning, George arrived to take her to run some errands before heading to the train station. She told her diary that George waits patiently a long while. What a kind man can do to make life smooth. On their way to the train, he collected information he needed from her to get a marriage license and had her try on his ring. She confided to her diary that she cried herself to sleep that night. On Monday, January 12th, George arrived at Elizabeth's boarding house at 10 a.m. He was, quote, wet through in the driving, drenching rain, unquote, showed her papers and told her of his final arrangements and to be ready at 1:15 with Nina. It reads like a Jane Austen novel, with the faithful hero standing in the rain declaring his love, but unlike an Austen novel, the challenges in their relationship remained unresolved. Elizabeth, George, and Nina met at the appointed time and traveled to Salem to Grace Episcopal Church. Reverend James Frank conducted Elizabeth and George's wedding ceremony with Nina as the sole witness. George stayed with his new wife at her hotel for about an hour before he headed back to Boston for a performance. The next few days continued to find them spending an hour or so together each day, and their nights always separate. The rumor mill soon uncovered their marriage to family and friends. Elizabeth's manager fired her as a result of her new marital status. She had a very difficult time finding work because managers didn't want to hire a married woman, but they needed her income. George was still supporting his family, and Elizabeth felt obligated to help her siblings. This meant the young couple was often apart, on the road with different shows, and living as frugally as possible so they could meet all their financial commitments. George's public persona was described as sunny and genial, and decades after his death, Elizabeth would write, "Was there ever anyone with your boyish capacity for being happy? Anyone who so attracted people? Who yet had so little pleasure in the presence of his kind?" But this cheerful characterization is very at odds with the despondency throughout his letters to her. And once they were married, new disagreements arose between them. Although before the marriage, George had indicated he was fine with Elizabeth continuing her acting career. Once they were married, he began saying otherwise. It was exactly as her grandmother had predicted. It wasn't necessarily because their careers physically separated them. Elizabeth found out she could have been cast in a play George was in, but he had turned it down without telling her. He wanted her to retire completely. He tried to paint a lovely domestic picture of him working some kind of retail job and coming home to spend evenings with her, but she was not convinced. She loved her work and intended to keep doing it. At the same time, he also must have understood the financial impossibility of her quitting her job. I don't want to leave the false impression that their passion for acting was keeping them from attempting more financially beneficial careers. Both George and Elizabeth were earning well. In 1886, George made a salary equivalent to about $128,000 in 2025. Elizabeth's salary on top of that gave them a combined income equal to $227,473 today. So they were making good money and becoming more famous in the theater world. George had initially been playing villains, but had finally gained a leading romantic hero role as a Union soldier in Held by the Enemy. The Wilmington, Delaware Morning News said his performance was manly and effective. The Cleveland Leader newspaper called the play the greatest American drama ever written. Even an illness that damaged his voice was written as a positive by reviewers. The Inter-Ocean in Chicago wrote, "Rarely is a heroic part treated in as manly, dignified, and natural manner as Mr. George R. Parks portrays the character of Colonel Charles Prescott. And if the cold he has contributed anything to the moderation of his speech, let Mr. Parks regard it as a happy accident and professionally adopt what chance enforced. His quiet earnestness, together with his intelligent bearing, made his work more impressive than could twice the vocal energy. The theater reviewer for the Hartford Daily Current said, "It is a fine play. Its dialogue delightful and refined, its court-martial scene very realistic, and its comedy possibly the best I have ever seen. I have never enjoyed a play more, and that others agree with me is proven by the overflowing audience which nightly fill the theater. The playwright, Mr. Gillette, has therefore given the theatrical literature something that will live on." And the play did live on. In 1920, it was made into a much-acclaimed silent film. But beyond the story of the play, Mr. Gillette introduced American audiences to a different kind of storytelling. Instead of melodramatic methods, he tried to make the story realistic. While it seems like talking about this play as a side note, it's not. This is really, really important, because this kind of realistic drama would become the kind of production Elizabeth would be drawn to, and that would eventually lead to her fame in Henry Ibsen's plays. Although George was the actor cast in Held by the Enemy, the role marked a pivotal change in Elizabeth's stage career. It was a defining moment. Another problem developed. George's devotion to Elizabeth crossed into unhealthy efforts to control her. She wrote to her father, "He hates to see me poring over books. We have awful times when I want to read at night after the theater. In a rash moment, I told him once that Mrs. Longstreet advised me to write a book. How he blazed. He replied that was grounds for divorce. Said the writing of a book was a separation of husband and wife, the ruin of a home." Despite these areas of contention, they did appear committed to their love for one another. Each would break away from their tours to visit the other when possible. Elizabeth's diary indicates they corresponded frequently, but they had not found any solutions to their troubles, and then more troubles arose. Elizabeth's mother was placed in a mental asylum, followed by the death of her primary confidant, her grandma, followed by the death of Elizabeth's younger sister, Una. Then her father's finances at his Florida property took a big hit. Elizabeth felt even more compelled to support her family. And in the midst of this, Elizabeth caught malaria. At the same time, George damaged his voice and began rapidly losing weight. Their ill health meant both missed performances and lost needed income. Then, Elizabeth's stage costumes, which she was required to purchase for herself, were all destroyed in a flood at her theater. In order for her to get back on stage, she would need to have her dressmaker remake every outfit required by her characters. It was an unexpected and massive expense equal to several months' salary. The start of 1887 found Elizabeth in Florida trying to help her father and brothers at their farm. Her diary entry on January 12, 1887, reflects the odd place the couple was in. Married 2 years today, sleep late, wake with terrible neuralgia in head and whole body racked with pain, dress at noon, and lie on the old bed in the parlor. Friends bring head cheese and homemade candy, which Elizabeth declares both bad. Saxon gets her some whiskey from a neighbor, and that makes her even sicker. Elizabeth spent the next week on the couch all day, weak and without the least appetite for cracker food. 1 or 2 silent tears over George. Where is he? How is he? Poor fellow. Despite his gloomy letters to her, George's career had never been going better. Then Elizabeth secured a position with a New York-based theater company. The spring of 1887 would find them bringing in a lot of money, though they were still trying to make up what they had lost during their illnesses and unemployment. Without telling George, Elizabeth worked with her father to try to secure a loan using her inheritance as collateral. The borrowed money would hopefully tide them over until Elizabeth and George had fully recovered and formed a long-term financial plan. By March, Elizabeth was back in New York and back on stage. By mid-May, she received news that her loan had been approved. but she had yet to let George know. On May 18th, she wrote in her diary, "How long, I wonder, will this stony depression continue? George in direst distress, the future grimly dark." So much is unclear in this entry. Who is experiencing stony depression? Whose future is grimly dark? Even with the benefit we have of looking backwards at history, these lines remain a mystery. About a week later, 2 weeks of entries have been ripped out of Elizabeth's diary. Here's what we know based on newspaper articles. On June 1st, Elizabeth and her mother-in-law, who were both in New York, received cryptic letters from George. Then, on June 3rd, Elizabeth received a telegram from a friend informing her George was missing. Here's what the New York Times reported on June 7th. The mysterious disappearance of George R. Parks, the actor, is just now the talk of the town. He left his apartment at the Tremont House last week with no information of his intention to leave the city. At first, it was supposed that he would turn up in a day or two, and the idea of a disappearance was scouted. His wife and mother have been in New York, and they arrived in Boston today. Mrs. Parks does not believe that her husband has committed suicide, but thinks he was laboring under a fit of temporary insanity and will come back in a few days at most. Nevertheless, she is greatly depressed and evidently feels more anxiety than she is willing to admit. She said to a reporter today, "Early last week, while in New York, I received a letter from my husband saying that he was tired of his embarrassment and did not know what he should do. That was the only reference he made to trouble of any kind, and there was nothing about the letter to indicate that he was going away. Consequently, I did not feel alarmed until Friday morning when I received a telegram from my friend in Boston, who told me that George had left Boston and no trace of his present whereabouts could be found. On the receipt of this, my mother-in-law and myself at once started for Boston. I cannot account for his disappearance unless it was caused by the trouble which he mentioned in his letter to me. He was not a spendthrift, but his traveling with his company for the last few years has proved very costly to him, and his debts have worried him a great deal." The Boston Globe also interviewed Elizabeth, and she told them, "I don't think George would ever be driven to the extreme of committing suicide. He was probably laboring under a temporary fit of insanity caused by his mental anxiety. It is only a question of time before he will come back. He was and always has been a good and true husband, and I know that he will return." In addition to her comments, the Boston Globe included this interview of one of George's friends. "There is not the least ground for supposing that Parks has killed himself. He was in the best of spirits when he left the house. I think that he's gone away with some of the boys and will be back as soon as he hears the rumors that are being circulated about his disappearance and supposed death." When George did not return as expected, Elizabeth and George's mother provided the police with the letters George had written them on the night of his disappearance. His mother's letter started with the line, "I die as I have lived." Police said his letter to Elizabeth included his intent to use theatrical armor to help him drown, though the only remaining proof of that story is in the newspapers. Elizabeth did not preserve the entire letter, but did retain these lines among others. "I will not stand in your light any longer. Think the best you can of me. I die loving you, if possible, more than ever. I die to save you pain and sorrow in the future. May your lines be cast in pleasanter places than in the past 4 years. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Yours in death, George." After listening to George's words, the question may reasonably be asked why Elizabeth and George's mother were not more concerned about what seem pretty obviously to be suicide notes. While I can't speak to the mind of his mother, we do know that George had been talking about suicide throughout his entire relationship with Elizabeth. He said he would die if she didn't marry him. He said that without her by his side at the end of 6 months, I shall not be living. He said he would die if she didn't come join him on tour. He said he would die if she didn't stop working. And a few months before his disappearance, George had written to her that if she didn't join him in 2 weeks, he would be a maniac. Maybe after 3.5 years of having him threaten suicide, she perceived it as more of a manipulation tactic, or even just meaningless words than actual intent to self-harm. It is impossible to know, but we do know that both George's wife and mother did not initially see anything to be concerned about when they read his letters. Thank you for listening to the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast. Would you please consider following and rating the podcast? If you follow us, you'll be notified each time we release an episode. And rating is an easy and free way to help us grow the platform. You may also help us by subscribing to our Patreon account. Your financial support goes directly towards paying the production costs, and you also get perks like exclusive articles and free merchandise. I am deeply appreciative of our mightily talented podcast team. Leif Thomason of Odd Life Studios produces this content as well as editing, mixing, and mastering it. Elisa Babor and Barry Mindel of Roots Creative Co. designed our amazing website and graphics. Randy Olson of Live Oak Theater wrote and performed our theme song, Time is Whispering. The diary entries and majority of the letters referenced in this episode are part of the Elizabeth Robbins Papers at New York University's Fields Library. The Mark Twain letters are courtesy of the Mark Twain Foundation and were copyrighted in 2001. Special thanks to Bob Hurst, the general editor of the Mark Twain Project, for sharing the letters with me. And of course, Elizabeth Robbins, who faced tragedy after tragedy and each time chose to persevere and overcome. In a letter to George, Elizabeth wrote, "The world seems very dreary till I say to myself, I'll spend the morning with my husband. How hurt and grieved, how utterly miserable would he be if he could see my desolation now and feel powerless to help me. I must prove that love is deathless, and that union in spirit is true marriage. His dear letters last night have put me into blessed rapport with him. I am fully conscious once more of the might of his great love, and I will hold it close to my aching heart and let it comfort me afresh." In one of those dear letters, he says, "Ah, would the little wife were waiting for me upstairs with a joss burning. And so, dear heart, I light a joss before your picture, and I am waiting for you once again."